With so many amazing options around the world to choose from, it can be hard to settle on just one, but there are many people who really seem to settle on Italy versus Portugal and try to choose between the two. I think it's partially because of how much both have been in the news in the last years, and a lot of things have changed. And even since some of my comparisons, some of my opinions have not necessarily changed, but there have been maybe some evolutions within that. So this week, I want to dive back into comparing and contrasting between living in Italy versus living in Portugal. I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. In previous episodes, I've spoken about maybe some of the costs of living and where I've seen things can cost a little more, cost a little less, and some of those aspects. And we're not going to go into specific details here. And when it comes to the cost of living, things have gone up in both countries, just like they have everywhere in the world. But in Portugal, I would say even more so, it at least has felt like, than in other places. It's gotten to the point where I would say if you are considering a major Portuguese city and you are looking at the cost of living there thinking that it looks low cost to you, then you might even want to consider looking at maybe some Italian cities, because you will find with how much things have gone up in the last years that they've actually started to approach Italian pricing. Portugal isn't the quote-unquote cheap country that it used to be. Not one of my favorite terms to use about really any country, but we'll say lower cost. And in many ways, there are certain aspects of life that can be low cost in Portugal, but they can also be in Italy. I've spoken about it in previous episodes as well about the cost of going out to eat. And in the past, I would have said that going out for dinner in Italy would have definitely been much more expensive. These days, from what I've been seeing personally, things in Portugal and things in Italy have gotten very close. And going out for a dinner in either country, I would say these days feels pretty on par. And like I said before, I'm not going to be going into specific cost of living, but just kind of general ideas here about what you might experience and some of the things that I've been seeing. I mean, even since we're on the topic of money, how are you going to be keeping your money? I would say in general, both countries, banking can be annoying. Getting a bank account in both countries can be very, very annoying. In Italy, you might even have to have multiple trips to the bank before you can finally get the account. And even in Portugal, it's not like you just open up a bank account. You apply for an account, make a deposit, and if they accept your application and the money, then your money will just be accessible as soon as your account is open. However, if your account is denied, then you're going to be probably given a check and be able to cash that check at that bank and hope that maybe you can go get an account somewhere else. The one thing I will say, though, is that in Portugal, you do have some interesting options for free bank accounts. Not that they're going to be the most amazing bank accounts, but they will still be fully functional and very usable. Although I will say that even though banking in both countries can be a little bit annoying, that I might somewhat prefer the experience as a customer when it comes to the apps and online services that you might find in Italy. The apps that I've seen in Italy seem to be a bit more robust and maybe a bit more functional. I can't even begin to tell you the number of times I've come up against problems with Portuguese bank accounts. And recently I was helping someone with their Portuguese bank account because there was a security issue that came up. A whole nightmare, a full day on the phone with the bank, trying to get things sorted out and dealing with their systems and how inaccessible everything was. And even when dealing with the security team, it was really scary to see some of the questions that they were asking, because the information that was being asked to confirm who this person was all based on publicly available information. So if you were to ask me, having seen those kinds of issues, having come up with individuals in Italy, I personally might put a little bit more faith in some of the banks that I've seen there versus some of the banks that I've seen in Portugal. In Portugal, it will be through their multibanco system, whereas in Italy, it'll be through bollette, that basically the same type of thing that in the past you may have been able to take, or actually still can take, to a tabacchi, to a tobacconist, to a tobacco shop. Yes, the place where you can buy your cigarettes is the same place where you can pay your bills, pay taxes, and do a lot of other things there. But now you can do both through a bank account in either country. It's just slightly different systems. However, I have seen that in Italy, it to me feels a little bit more straightforward. And some of the apps in Portugal, yes, you can just take a picture and it will scan the text on the bill itself, and you'll have to put in a 9-digit code and then a 9-digit code for who is it going to, the legal entity that it's going to, the account that it's going to, and then the amount that's being paid. Whereas I've seen in Italy on the bills there that they have a code that is readable by many apps, at least, where you can just scan that code and it will enter the information that way. In Portugal, I've had the experience many times where, based on the lighting or how legible the printing is, that the information copied through this picture that's being taken is not always done accurately, and maybe a comma might be moved over a couple places, or the amounts might be incorrect, or the account that you're sending it to is incorrect. That's just something to be aware of. So if you are in Portugal and dealing with that, just be aware and just be careful to make sure to double check what amounts are being put in. But a lot of things in Portugal, whether you're paying taxes or you're paying for a fine, or even if you're calling phone numbers, there are so many 9-digit numbers in that country that you're sometimes not sure, is this the tax code, or is this the account code, or is this a phone number? And yes, I am joking a bit here, but I would think that maybe it might be a little bit easier to have different sorts of numbers, alphanumeric codes, or whatever it might be, to identify that this is one kind of code, this is another type of account number, this is a phone number, that are all slightly different so that maybe they can't get mixed up. Not saying I've gotten them mixed up, but I think I could see how it would be possible for that to happen. But maybe let's take a break for a second and talk about some of the fun things. Places you can go, nature, beaches, theme parks, cities, villages, whatever it may be. Of course, because Italy is a much larger country, there are just going to be so many more options at your fingertips. In the north of Italy, you have the mountains. In the south, you have the sun, the sand, and the beaches. But even in the center of the country, you can have the mountains and skiing in the morning, and then in the afternoon, beach and seafood. It depends on where you are, and it depends on what you're going to be looking for. And then even in Portugal, you're never really going to be more than a couple of hours at maximum away from a beach. With how much coastline is there, it's hard not to find a beach. Although I will say there is a big difference between some of the beaches that you may find in Portugal versus Italy. Italy does have some sandy beaches, but very often you'll be finding very rocky beaches, like big pebbles, small pebbles, big stones, small stones. The experience, I would say, overall is quite different in that way. And in Portugal, I noticed that many more beaches were open just to the public, that there was not necessarily specific cordoned off areas with just beach chairs only, and then a very small section of beach that's public. It's not that you can't find private beaches in Portugal, but in Italy, a lot of the best beaches also happen to be private beaches, and you'll have to pay a fee to go in there. Not that it's the only option, but it's a very common option. And because both countries are surrounded by water, you will find a lot of great seafood. Although I might, in some ways, again, give the slight edge to Portugal, just because you do have a lot of seafood that is caught locally. It's not that you don't have it caught in Italy, but in Italy, I feel as though I've often heard more about imported fish, even if you are by the seaside. But in Portugal, for example, there are almost every major city has some big fish market or outdoor market of some sort, and you will see the fishing boats going in and out, and it's still very much a part of Portuguese life. It's not that it's not a part of life in Italy. It's just, if you're saying as the average person, what I've noticed in both countries, maybe I've noticed more fresh fish there, and also a lot more fish that's just kind of generally part of the diet. Like when you're going into a supermarket, the fresh fish sections are generally a bit bigger, and then even frozen fish, tons. I mean, it feels like it's never-ending sections of freezers that have just all kinds of frozen fish. And then, of course, the salted cod. I mean, some stores will have huge counters of just salted cod and all different types of salted cod. In Italy, you do find salted cod, don't get me wrong, but some of those sections there, even in the places that are more kind of fishy diets, fish-based diets, it just doesn't feel like they're as expansive as what you might find in Portugal. But that's not a bad thing. I would say, though, in general, when it does come to food, my experience in Italy overall does sometimes feel like the quality is maybe just a step above. I mean, food quality in Portugal can be great. Don't get me wrong. And years ago, I did actually say, I think in a video, that to me, the quality of meat in Portugal felt slightly better. But having been going back to Italy a lot more recently and exploring different areas and exploring different dishes, the kind of general baseline that I've been seeing nowadays, it feels as though the quality is maybe just a step above. And even my experience with fruits and vegetables, the flavor just alone of the fruits and vegetables in Italy, I don't know, there's something about it there. There's something about it in Italy that it just feels like there's a little extra. I can't explain it. I can't quite put it into words. And don't get me wrong, fruit and veg in Portugal is amazing. But Italy's something else. And when it comes to seaside fun in Italy, you have a lot more variation just because it's a much bigger country. A lot of islands. Not that Portugal doesn't have islands. The islands are further away, maybe. But you also have the water is maybe a little bit more calm because you're not on the Atlantic Ocean. You're on, well, parts of it are on the Mediterranean Sea and then the Adriatic Sea. You have a different kind of feel. And there will be plenty of parts of the year where the water will feel much warmer. But if you are the type of person that's looking for surfing, some of the best surfing in the world can be found in Portugal. Some of the biggest waves have been found in Portugal in recent years with some of the big surfing competitions that happen there. I mean, we've seen monster waves. So, I mean, you got to be a real strong swimmer there. But if you're someone looking for maybe a bit more of a relaxed kind of Mediterranean feel, going out on a boat with somewhat calm water, then yeah, okay, you're going to be maybe finding this a bit more in Italy than you would find in Portugal. I mean, even if you're going off of the coast in the Algarve, you're in the Atlantic Ocean and it gets pretty choppy out there. And for all of that fun, though, you have to be able to get there. So let's talk about transportation for just a second. I have mentioned in the past about the difference between getting around with Ubers versus taxis, but even though there is that really nice kind of added bonus in Portugal of being able to get around quite easily and for a very reasonable price with Ubers and Bolts, in Italy, really, you do only have taxis. Granted, yes, in some cities you'll have Uber Blacks available, or in Rome, the taxi company will have an integration with Uber, but we're still talking about somewhat limited options. And then even to the limited options, you have to pay quite a bit for those options as well. But if we're talking maybe about an equivalent distance traveled in both countries and equivalent amount of time in the ride, and kind of if you were to try to compare apples to apples, even though we are comparing apples to oranges here, we're going to say that maybe, or not we, but I will say that the cost of paying for that type of transportation in Italy could be double, if not more, for a similar type of ride. But one of the really massive benefits that you have when trying to get around Italy, because it's a much larger country and it has many more airports, that means you'll have more options for different types of places that you can take domestic flights to. And that means even, especially going from north to south, it's not just that you're going to have options on the boot itself, but you can also get to Sicily quite easily through a plane. And even recently, they've been talking about building a bridge from mainland Italy to Sicily and being able to send many more trains to the island. Because even though there is no bridge now, there are trains that actually do go to Sicily. But what happens is that the train gets onto a boat and then gets off the boat. And yes, we are talking about passenger trains here, not just cargo trains. Anyway, that's a whole different thing. But in general, in Italy, it's not just these planes that you have available, but also the train system in Italy is probably one of the best in the world. I mean, I think it actually has been ranked in the top position in Europe in recent years, even ranking above Germany. Germany was always number one, but I think they've dropped down a couple spots. But in Italy, even for all of the imperfections that come along with it, and sometimes the delays or whatever, the cancellations, the network is out of this world. All the types of places that you can get to. Yes, you might not have every tiny little village. And even in Portugal, you will not have every tiny little village. However, to me, in my experience, based on what I've seen, it does seem as though that there are more possibilities of places to stop and more variations in the types of places that you can go to. And then even then, if we're talking about maybe the amount of time that you'll spend on the train, you can get further faster. Not that the Portuguese trains are slow, but you can cover a lot of ground really quickly. And in both countries, it will be for a very reasonable price. Although I will say in Italy, it does often cost a bit more than what you might think to spend in Portugal. But also one of the really nice options in Italy is that you don't just have the main national carrier, but you also have a private carrier that will be able to take you all around the country as well to some of the more major high-speed hubs. And of course, just from Trenitalia, the major national line, they have multiple levels of trains. They have regional, high-speed regional, interregional, Freccia Rossa, Freccia Bianca, Freccia this, Freccia that. And in Portugal, of course, they have the regional trains, the high-speed trains. But just to me, as somebody who's paid a lot of attention to how it is to get around in both countries, I've seen a lot more options to get to a lot more places in many positions in Italy than I would say that I've seen in Portugal. Not that Portugal doesn't have options. You can get to a lot of the major cities quite easily, but then to get to maybe your final destination, you would be more likely to have to take a bus after that point. Whereas in Italy, even though there are going to be places where you would have to take buses to, there are going to be those places that are really off the beaten path, but still also have a train stop. Some of them even on a high-speed train line. Like when I used to live in Rovigo, it's really out in the countryside. It's in nothing. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere to an extent between Padova and Bologna. But because it's on that high-speed rail line between those two major cities, they do have a high-speed station there. And you can get to some of the major cities in the country within 5 hours or less, 3 hours or less, or even an hour or less, depending on how far you're needing to go or wanting to go. But anyway, I think this is where I'm going to round out this episode. And so for those of you who have an interest in Italy and or Portugal and want to hear more about the comparisons between the two, feel free to let me know down in the comments section below here on YouTube. And if you have any specific questions that would maybe compare and contrast between the two, please feel free to let me know. Actually, some of you recently have been asking me in private messages and also comments, which do I prefer? Do I prefer Italy or do I prefer Portugal? I love both countries and I love them each in their different ways. Maybe in some ways, one is a little bit more ideal, and in other ways, maybe the other is a little bit more ideal. Neither are perfect, but both are fantastic. Anyway, of course, a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/Rafael Di Furia, as well as a huge thank you to those of you who help through the thanks button on YouTube, as well as the one-time support through RafaelDiFuria.com/support. And as well, thank you to those of you who participate in the conversation in the comment section below this video on YouTube, as well as to those of you who leave a like and share these episodes with your friends. They all help in their own different way. But of course, again, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.